Okay, y'all. So I went back here after I was totally done with the evening to double check that first hour because I got kicked off there at some point somehow. I don't even know how, but it cut off about 30 minutes of what I had to say. So I'm gonna try to cover that section now in a third video, which will go in between the first two. But I'm going to do this much quicker than I did earlier, just because it's now late for me and I want to be done. But I'm sure you won't mind if I do it a little more quickly. So at the end of that first video, I was reading verse 29 when I got interrupted. And so I'm going to pick it up right there with verse 29 and read through verse 30 and then say a few things. Okay, but I say to you, Jesus said, I will not drink of this fruit of the vine from now on until that day when I drink it new with you in my Father's kingdom. After singing a hymn, they went out to the Mount of Olives. And then Jesus said to, now I'm going to stop there. So in these, in the first two verses of this chapter, we have Jesus predicting some really important things here. First of all, you know that after 2 days the Passover is coming, and the Son of Man is to be handed over for crucifixion. So notice in verse 1, by the way, he said that he had finished after when Jesus had finished all these words. So he had just finished the Olivet Discourse, which we talked about last week. And that means that he was describing, his own coming in glory and judging the nations. And then now he's just, spinning the heads of the disciples by saying, now I'm going to be taken and I'm going to be handed over for crucifixion. How do you keep up with this? But this is exactly what he's doing. It's almost shocking. But so he's talking about the future. He's predicting the future. I'm not saying he's doing anything wrong for sure, but I'm just saying that it must have been difficult to handle because now he's saying, okay, that's what's going to happen someday. But now let's get back to the business at hand. I'm going to go to the cross, and so this is what he says. He's going to go to be crucified, handed over for crucifixion on Passover. So. He's just demonstrating that he's in complete control of this situation. It's no coincidence that he died on Passover, because he is the Passover lamb. He is the sacrifice that was pictured for century upon century, preparing the Jewish people for this moment when the Messiah would be the suffering servant who would be sacrificed for their sins. And so it's at least the fourth time in Matthew that he predicted his death. But remember, he's just preparing his disciples. He's preparing them for what's coming. This is what's going to happen. It's not going to be a surprise to them. It shouldn't be a surprise to them. But he's showing them the plan. And so this is proof that he is God, that he is predicting the future, and he's in complete control of the situation. Verses 3 through 5 is the plot from the chief priests and the elders and Caiaphas and they plotted to seize him by stealth and kill him. So it was dishonest from the start. They knew that Jesus was innocent. They were afraid of the crowds. They even decided, look at this, they decided not to arrest him during the festival because they didn't want a riot to break out. They knew a riot would break out because the people loved Jesus. And but that just shows that Jesus is in control, Jesus decided when he was going to die. And so his enemies wanted to kill him earlier, but couldn't do it because God didn't allow it to happen. And then now they want to wait, but uh, Jesus is going to die at the very time when they didn't want it to happen, because that's the time that the Father and the Son had agreed would happen. And we'll talk more about that later. Just the fact that that Passover was the perfect time for Jesus to die. So then we have this beautiful story of this woman with the alabaster vial of very costly perfume. John tells a similar story. It's probably the same story. He tells us that this woman was Mary, the sister of Lazarus, and that this was just a very very monumental moment in the life of Lazarus and Mary and Martha, because first of all, it was in Bethany, which is where Lazarus and his sisters lived. But Jesus said that, verse 12, she did it to prepare me for burial. So it just makes sense that Mary would do this. Mary is the one who was sitting at Jesus' feet, and Martha complained, and Jesus said she's choosing the good part. And so Mary was listening. Nobody else was listening to Jesus when he said he was going to die. They it's like the disciples are going, la, 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 I'm not listening. But Mary listened. And so she comes in with this alabaster vial of very costly perfume. Some research I did indicates that this would have been about as valuable as a year's wages. And I don't know, what you think that is, but like the average, I think in the United States is something like $46,000 or something like it. Imagine just pouring out $46,000 in one act of worship, or throwing $46,000 into the offering basket at church. I mean, that's pretty astonishing. I've never done anything like that. I've never given that kind of a gift, but just a little bit over time. But this just showed that Mary not only loved Jesus, she loved him tremendously, but she also she was listening. She was preparing him for his death. And she believed he was going to die. And that's more than we can say for the disciples. But also Mary just understood worship, that this was so important. This was such an important act of worship. Jesus even said that you always have the poor, but you don't always have me. And so Jesus is essentially saying that worship trumps good deeds here, at least in this case. And I think in many cases that's the case. The disciples called this a waste of time, and a lot of people will call worship and just a lavish gift to Christ wasteful. Sell it and give it to the poor. Well, no, Jesus is the very reason that we love the poor and that we do good deeds for the poor. So I just love this story, and I just think it's worth your time to come back and read it and consider it and think about it, and read the John's version in John chapter 12. Then we have Judas, by contrast, Judas here in 14 through 16 here, and he went to betray Jesus. And I don't like to talk that much about Judas. If you look at all the Jesus movies, they're fascinated with Judas. A lot of times Judas has even become the central character of some of the Jesus movies. There's one that actually was pretty controversial in, say, I don't know, the 90s or so, where Judas was actually the hero and Jesus was a crazy man. It's just bizarre stuff. But Judas was the one who was calling this act of worship beautiful. A waste, and Jesus was calling it beautiful. And so he'd been rebuked by Jesus, and so he goes out and that was the tipping point. He was rebuked by Jesus, and I get that from John. John says it was Judas who said this perfume should have been sold and given to the poor. But Jesus rebuked Judas, and so Judas goes out and betrays Jesus for 30 pieces of silver. Exodus 21:32 is that it's actually the price of a dead slave, ironically. But apparently didn't bargain for more. Luke and John tell us that Satan himself was behind this, that Satan entered Judas. There's a lot going on here. Then in 17 and following, all the way through verse 30, Jesus is celebrating the Passover. And there's this incredible story where Jesus shows again that he's in complete control. There's a guy, he has a place for us to celebrate the Passover. Tell him the time is near, and he's already got this incredible situation set up so that he can celebrate the Passover with his disciples. And so let's see, what do we want to say about that? The Passover started the Feast of Unleavened Bread, which was a week. Passover was the first day on a Thursday. And Jews weren't allowed to eat unleavened bread during this time, and they left because long ago the Jewish slaves left Egypt in a hurry. There was no time for the bread to rise, and so that's why they were told to eat unleavened bread, because it was a reminder of what God had done for them in Egypt. And so this is the context in which Jesus institutes the Last Supper. So here in verse 20, Jesus begins this Passover celebration by identifying his betrayer. He says, "One of you will betray me," verse 21, and they're all grieved, and they began to say to him, "Surely not I, Lord." And so it's, I can't remember whether this is on the other video or not, but it's just fascinating to me that none of them said, "Oh, it's going to be Judas." They all considered that it could be them. We could all be a Judas. It's a remarkable kind of event there. But Jesus identifies him. Judas says, verse 25, "Surely it's not I, Lord," or Rabbi. And Jesus said to him, "You have said it yourself. You know it is you." Judas, we're told in another place, leaves them at this point. And so Jesus institutes the Lord's Supper. The breaking of bread, the drinking of wine, the giving of thanks. These are all elements of the Passover. So it's very authentic from that perspective. And but then Jesus changes it. He passes out the bread and he says, "This is my body," which wasn't part of the original Passover celebrations. And then verse 28 says, "For this is my blood." He's drinking, they're drinking from the cup of redemption, the final cup of the Passover celebration. And he says it's poured out for forgiveness of sins. I mean, this is a drastic change to the Passover celebration. And that's where he says, "I say to you, I will not drink of this fruit of the vine from now on until that day when I drink it new with you in my Father's kingdom." So here he's actually pointing ahead, I believe, to the wedding supper of the Lamb, which is talked about in the book of Revelation. He's actually kind of suggesting that there will be wine in heaven. That's interesting, but um, certainly not. That's certainly not the point. But then they sing a hymn and they go out to the Mount of Olives. Okay, and so going back to let's see, going back to my notes here. Let me pull them up here. I've got again in verses 1 through 30. Jesus saying, my time is, Jesus saying, showing that he was in complete control of the whole situation, displaying his deity, even as he also displays his humanity in this section. But he predicted his death. He praised his preparer, Mary, or the woman who prepared him for his death. He prepared for the Passover. He identified his betrayer, and he instituted the Lord's Supper, all in this section. So let's go on now to 31 through 56. And come on. And let's read this passage, 31 through 56. Okay, then Jesus said to them, "You will all fall away because of me this night. For it is written, I will strike down the shepherd, and the sheep of the flock shall be scattered. But after I have been raised, I will go ahead of you to Galilee." But Peter said to him, "Even though all may fall away because of you, I will never fall away." Jesus said to him, "Truly I say to you that this very night, before a rooster crows, you will deny me 3 times. Peter said to him, "Even if I have to die with you, I will not deny you." All the disciples said the same thing. So Peter gets, anyway, I'm not going to comment yet, but verse 36, then Jesus came with them to a place called Gethsemane and said to his disciples, "Sit here while I go over there and pray." And he took with him Peter and the 2 sons of Zebedee, and began to be grieved and distressed. And then he said to them, "My soul is deeply grieved to the point of death. Remain here and keep watch with me." And he went a little beyond them and fell on his face and prayed, saying, "My Father, if it is possible, let this cup pass from me, yet not as I will, but as you will." And he came to the disciples and found them sleeping, and said to Peter, "So you men could not keep watch with me for 1 hour? Keep watching and praying that you may not enter into temptation. The spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak." He went away again a second time and prayed, saying, "My Father, if this cannot pass away unless I drink it, your will be done." Again he came and found them sleeping, for their eyes were heavy. And he left them again and went away and prayed a 3rd time, saying the same thing once more. Then he came to the disciples and said to them, "Are you still sleeping and resting? Behold, the hour is at hand, and the Son of Man is being betrayed into the hands of sinners. Get up, let us be going. Behold, the one who betrays me is at hand." While he was still speaking, behold, Judas, one of the 12, came up, accompanied by a large crowd with swords and clubs, who came from the chief priests and elders of the people. Now he who was betraying him gave them a sign, saying, "Whomever I kiss, he is the one, seize him." Immediately Judas went to Jesus and said, "Hail, Rabbi," and kissed him. And Jesus said to him, "Friend, do what you have come for." Then they came and laid hands on Jesus and seized him. And behold, one of those who were with Jesus reached and drew out his sword and struck the slave of the high priest and cut off his ear. Then Jesus said to him, "Put your sword back into its place, for all those who take up the sword shall perish by the sword. Or do you think that I cannot appeal to my Father, and he will at once put at my disposal more than 12 legions of angels? How then will the scriptures be fulfilled which say that it must happen this way?" At that time, Jesus said to the crowds, "Have you come out with swords and clubs to arrest me as you would against a robber? Every day I used to sit in the temple teaching, and you did not seize me. But all this has taken place to fulfill the scriptures of the prophets." Then all the disciples left him and fled. All right, so Jesus told the disciples, and this is what I put here. I called this, "My soul is deeply grieved," because I get that from the section where Jesus is praying. And it's just a really convicting part of this passage, because one of the final things that Jesus did in training his disciples was challenge them to pray, and they failed. But Jesus dreaded what was about to happen, displaying his humanity. So I had said before that Jesus showed that he was in complete control of everything, and that displayed his deity. And so here he's displaying his humanity by saying that he dreads what is going to happen. So Jesus told the disciples they would fall away, but they said never. Jesus told the disciples to watch and pray, but they slept. Jesus told the disciples it must happen this way, but they resisted. What to say about this? First of all, Jesus told them that they would all fall away, but they said never. That's pretty straightforward. This is another shocking revelation, that they would fall away, even though they don't really agree with him at this point. They will not deny him, they said. He still predicted it correctly. And then in the Garden of Gethsemane, there, the verse 36 and following, he's asking them to pray, but they just slept. He's there most closely with Peter and the two sons of Zebedee, which is James and John. It says that he began to be grieved and distressed. These are strong words. Both have the idea of heaviness or even like depression. And look at what he says in verse 38. My soul is deeply grieved to the point of death. It's almost as though he's saying, look, I might die right here in Gethsemane. And you guys can't pray with me. You can't even stay awake. They just did not understand the gravity of the situation. And so he prays that the cup would pass, that the Father would, verse 39, let this cup pass from me. And so what is that cup? I believe that cup is that moment when Jesus said, "Why have you forsaken me?" when he was on the cross. It was at that moment that Jesus took on the sins of the world and became the sacrificial lamb, and the Father turned away. The Father turned away from sin. And so it's at this time that he's dreading that. We don't even know. We can't even understand what this means, that he would in some way be separated from the Father because of the sin that he bore for our sakes. And so we don't even know what that means. We can't even understand it. But it's completely unprecedented in all of eternity for this kind of a separation of any kind to happen within the Trinity itself. So it's just fantastically unprecedented, and just again, what's happening here with the disciples is Jesus is preparing them, and I think what he's saying is pray. Disciples, pray and watch, and even if they have to do without sleep, sometimes they will pray. Pretty convicting. And of course, we have this encounter where Jesus is arrested, and let's see. you know, it's an important part of the story that Judas kisses Jesus and Jesus calls him friend. Isn't that interesting? Um, but ultimately, he's betrayed, and you know, we know that this was Peter from another gospel account, that Peter pulled out his sword and cut off the high priest's ear, and from another, let's see, I have that here somewhere in my notes. Uh, so they all kind of include different details about this arrest, but that's just like what eyewitnesses do. Um, they include different details. It's not that they contradict each other; they don't contradict each other. You know, so say like Mark and Luke uh, include that. Let's see, what do I have here? Um, so John, here it is. Matthew told us there were two more scriptures fulfilled here. John told us that Peter cut off the ear. Luke tells us Jesus healed the ear. Mark tells us a young man fled without a linen cloth. He ran off naked. And again, these don't contradict each other. They simply are people recalling the specific details that they remember. And this leads us up to the trials of Jesus. And so again, Jesus dreaded what was about to happen, displaying his humanity. He told the disciples they would fall away, but they said never. Told the disciples to watch and pray, but they slept. Told the disciples it must happen this way, but they resisted. So that's the other thing that I wanted to bring out here, was just that Jesus says, verse 54, how then will the scripture be fulfilled, which say that it must happen this way? Verse 56, but all this has taken place to fulfill the scriptures of the prophets. So this is the way it's supposed to happen, and Jesus is in complete control as the God of the universe, who is giving himself as a sacrifice here. It's all planned by the Father and the Son and the Spirit, and it's going to happen according to plan. And so go on now to the third video.